Hey everybody, so we're on to the second lesson of chapter 4, and we of course took time to talk about the large population that was changing the face and size of American cities by having all of these new immigrants come into our big cities and really begin to change America. Today, we want to delve into that a little bit more, taking a look at and talking about what those cities actually looked like that those people were living in. Because it's really important to understand that most Americans at this time were either living in cities or moving to cities. Just to kind of give you some perspective, New York grew by 3.5 million people in 40 years. That's huge. The population of Pennsylvania in the last census that we took was like 14 million. So it's a tremendous number of people that moved to New York City in a very short window of time. And that's just New York. There's so many other cities around the country as well that see something similar. And we need to understand why people were moving to these places, right? They were looking for better jobs, much like why those immigrants were coming here to begin with. They're looking for better pay in those jobs that are better. They're looking for other things that we take advantage of so much, like electricity, plumbing, right? Just being able to flush the toilet or turn on some running water. Entertainment, nightlife, culture. These are things that people are looking for when they move to these cities. And what's interesting about these cities, and it's something, of course, that becomes unique at first to just America and then other places, skyscrapers. Because when you have millions and millions of people pouring into these cities in just a short time span, you have no place to put them. You could either build out or you can build up. And the reality is, if you want a city that functions like a city, you got to build up. Because, if you keep building out, it's going to be too big to call even a city. And let's not forget even New York City, right? That's an island. It's the island of Manhattan. So if we build out, we run out of space. So we have to build up. We see skyscrapers begin to appear, and we need some way to move all these people around. This is before we had subways, before we had cars, so we have to find other ways to have mass transit. In this case, if you remember back to that web quest we studied, we're talking about the horse car, a trolley car attached to a horse pulled on tracks. But still, it's mass transit. Now, the people who were living in these cities, there were usually different kinds of people living in these cities. The lower class, the working class, people who worked in these factories, the immigrants, they're living in types of buildings called tenements. They're multi-family buildings. You'll have on one floor 4 or 5 apartments. You'll have anywhere between 4 and 10 people per apartment. Usually it's only 1 or 2 rooms. And the building itself is about 4 to 5 stories tall. So you can have, in these buildings, one building can house like 220 different immigrants. That's a ton of people. There are 220 lower class people all living together in just one building. And they're sharing things in these tenements, right? They're sharing bathrooms. They're sharing garbage disposal. There's no air conditioning, very little in the way of windows. The stench in these tenement houses is just catastrophic. It's worth pointing out that white lower class men definitely earned less than didn't earn much, I should say, but they still earned more than lower class blacks or lower class immigrants or lower class women. So white males, even though they weren't paid much, are still in fact being paid more than these other groups of people, which is, it's important to point out because of the difficulty it will create for those other groups to advance, but it's also to point out that the dire circumstances that even with that change in pay, so many families were stuck in these tenements where you shared your room with so few people, where there's no trash pickup. You would just throw the trash in the basement. That's no joke. And you would get your trash emptied twice a year. You would have outhouses if you lived in one of the old tenements, or you would share a bathroom for all 50 people on a floor. It was a nightmare in these tenements. The middle class was definitely growing at the same time because the more lower class people you have, then the more middle class people you need too. You need more doctors and engineers and lawyers and teachers and all these different groups of people that make up the middle class. So that's going to expand as well. But instead of living in the tenement parts of cities, they're going to move outside the cities to what we call now the suburbs. So we have the inner city, then we have the suburbs. And then last but not least, we have the wealthy. The wealthy will live in isolated areas inside the city, away from the very, very poor. All of these issues, right, this increase in urban population, it's going to lead to some problems, obviously. You're going to see more crime than you've ever seen before because you have more poverty in a small area than you've ever had before. When you're living all crowded together like this, disease will be a huge problem, right? One person gets sick in a tenement, everyone's going to get sick. Fire can put hundreds and hundreds out of a home. Pollution will grow up since the cities aren't prepared to care for these millions upon millions of people. And on top of all of that, we'll see political corruption. In big cities, something existed called the political machine. And I want you to think about the political machine kind of like a car. In order to get the car to move, everyone has a role to play. The wheels have to turn, the engine has to run, steering wheel's got to turn, all those kinds of things. And the trick is that if you want to ride in the car, you have to vote for it when it comes time for an election. So the political machine, this political organization, which is tied to a political party, either Republican or Democrat, is going to come up to you and say, hey, you want to ride in my car? You want work or a place to live or some food or police protection? Then you have to vote for my political party and my political machine. And all of this is controlled by someone called the party boss. The party boss was in charge of the machine. And the party boss gets these votes by trading people what they need. They also get rich from something called graft, which is bribery. You get money illegally. You can use it. You can use it in bribes. You can sell building contracts to friends. You can sell permits to friends. One of the most famous bosses that we'll talk about every now and then is called Boss Tweed, who leads the Tammany Hall machine of New York Democrats, one of the largest that we'd seen in our country. And stepping away from that, when we see how politics ran and we see the immigration that was there and we see where people lived, we can get a feeling for just how fast-paced society was in those cities and how fast it was, in fact, changing.